Managed mentoring for getting started in beekeeping. This is the Demaree method for swarm control. I am Kevin England. In this lesson, we'll tell you what the Demaree method is, where it came from, and how it works, the fundamentals. We'll talk about using it for swarm control, and especially in those situations where you have capped queen cells present. The Demaree method is more than swarm control. There are a number of other management practices you can do with it, and we'll talk about the ins and outs of managing a Demaree stack. There's a bit of mystique about the Demaree method for swarm control. One of the reasons for this is that the original Demaree method has morphed to a more complicated instruction set in modern day use. It employs a vertical split that spaces the resources out in a strategic manner, but keeps the colony stacked together. The original premise, as presented in the bee journals from the 1800s, as described by George Demaree, the founder of the process, was simpler than today's instruction set. The reason it has evolved over time is that the original process was moderately successful, and the updates to the process that bear the names of the founder today are a little bit different. How it works will become apparent as we work our way through the lesson. Fundamentally, the process divides the resources into a vertical split, isolating the queen from the brood in development. And in doing so, the result is a management practice that prevents the colony from swarming while maintaining a large workforce. The first thing to consider is the reason to perform the process. The Demaree method can be used for everyday swarm control, but it could also be used, and it excels at, a special condition that you may encounter. That situation is if you find a hive that has built swarm cells and is physically on the cusp of swarming. You could use the process to proactively get ahead of swarming, or as a technique to change the trajectory of an in-progress swarm that you wish to stop. When you execute the intervention, there are ways to take the intervention forward that accomplishes different goals. Goals such as replacing the queen or building a second successful colony to split off later after proof of success is obtained. These will be elaborated as we move through the lesson. Let's overview the process and the premise of why you would do this. The basic premise is to redistribute colony resources into a specific hive configuration. And for that, you're going to need an extra box, some extra frames with foundation or drawn comb, and a queen excluder. The resultant configuration builds two chambers for the bees to operate. The queen and any capped brood would be placed in the center of the bottom box, along with some honey resources. You would fill out that box with foundation or drawn comb. Place over it the new box, and again, either foundation or drawn comb is placed over top. That is the operational chamber for the current queen, and given all the resources were stripped out, it'll feel like to that part of the colony that a swarm has occurred. A queen excluder is placed over that stack, and all of the remaining bees, open brood, nurse brood, and resources are placed in the top box above the queen excluder. And the management of that particular box will be carried in the next couple slides, but in essence, you're creating a vertical swarm here and separating those bees so they feel like they've been split off. Now, the illustration on the left shows the proactive approach that we just spoke of. In contrast, one of the situations you might find would be the one on the right. To mitigate the swarm, the queen cells, if you found them in the existing box, would be moved to the top of the hive. And from this point, you can decide what your intent is when it comes to allowing those queen cells to proceed or tearing them down. From a management practice here, you can make your choices. If you did find queen cells and stop the imminent swarm by moving the queen cells above the queen excluder, you could take this down a couple different paths. On the left side, this is where you would cull any queen cells to prevent the top box from rearing a queen. Alternatively, on the right side, maybe you will choose to let them rear a queen, and in this case, you will switch out the queen excluder for a divider, which we'll cover in a slide or two. In the scenario where you're eliminating the queen cells, your goal here is to let all the brood run its course and eliminate any potential for the bees trying to make swarm cells. You would go through and crush any queen cells and then come back periodically every 5 to 6 days to see if they created any queen cells, and if so, eliminate those also. You'll end up with the colony on the right, which has nothing but brood in develop, and then eventually all that brood will run its course, and you will have eliminated the potential for the bees to create any replacement queens. Now, following this second option path, it's to let the queen cells develop to a full queen, and this requires a quick consideration. In a traditional Demaree method, the top chamber is separated from the bottom chamber using a queen excluder. In the case of queen cells emerging, the virgin queen is small enough that she can get down through the queen excluder and may go for a tussle with the queen in the bottom chamber. In the case of allowing the top chamber to rear its own queen, you would want to switch out the queen excluder with something like a Snellgrove board. This is a specialized piece of equipment, and as you can tell by the picture, it has an entrance that's openable on the front. From that perspective, the virgin queen could get out of the top chamber and go get mated, and then come back in and return to be the queen of the colony that is in the top chamber. Carrying through this second option, you could use this to rear a two-queen system, one in the top chamber and one in the bottom chamber. Beekeepers consider this option as a method of succession. When the queen in the top becomes operational, it can provide an opportunity. The new top box queen is likely superior to the older bottom box queen. As a beekeeper, you have the opportunity to execute the replacement. When the swarm season abates, you can succeed your old queen by dispatching her from the lower chamber and performing a combine to allow the entire stack to come together. This leaves the new queen at helm. Additionally, some beekeepers use this as a method to ensure the top colony is viable before ultimately foregoing swarm management and simply using the practice to split the top colony off to a new hive stack. It's another variation of making a split, but it employs the tactics of the Demaree method to get to the finish line. Now let's come back to option number one, the traditional Demaree method, where you cull the queen cells. This illustration shows what happens when the colony runs its course. The queen at the bottom builds out the nest, and the brood above the queen excluder finishes, and eventually the bees will fill it with honey. The productivity of the hive will be exemplary because none of the workforce flew away, and it's highly likely that you will be adding honey supers on top of the stack. So let's talk about that next. In practice, there are some cons to the approach. Yes, you can make a lot of honey, and yes, you keep your workforce, but you have to consider how the hive stack stacks up. The top box in the Demaree is a deep. When full of honey, it will weigh over 100 pounds. Any honey boxes that you super with will be above the deeps, and harvesting a box that is 60 plus pounds in a medium sitting over 3 deeps could prove to be a chore. You very much have to think through the process when considering whether or not you might consider employing this technique as part of your management plan. Closing the lesson down, in this lesson we covered the Demaree method. Our next lesson overviews how you might set yourself up for answering swarm calls or trapping swarms. Then we turn to the ins and outs of honey harvesting. If you have questions, you can ask at our next online session. You can also send an email to the address on the slide. If you're watching from YouTube, you can leave a comment below. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you at the next lesson.